let's start with the ugly truth. You weren't abandoned because you were too much. You were abandoned because they were incapable of holding you. And that distinction, that's the difference between a wound and a weapon. This isn't about self-love mantras or blaming narcissists. This is about repetition compulsion, the unconscious drive to reenact childhood relational dynamics because your nervous system mistakes familiar pain for safety. You keep choosing people who cannot meet you, not because you're broken, but because their inability feels like home. And that's identity trauma. Full script, Chapter 1, The Addiction to Emotional Malnourishment. Tell me if this sounds familiar. You meet someone, and it's not that they're good for you, it's that they're familiar. The way they withhold feels like home. The way they make you work for decency, that's just love, isn't it? You tell yourself you're choosing them, but let's be fucking honest. You're addicted to them, not to who they are, but to what they withhold. And that's not love. That's repetition compulsion wearing a romance costume. Here's the psychological truth you've been avoiding. Your brain doesn't crave them. It craves the dopamine spike of their inconsistency, the highs and lows of their attention. That's not passion. That's intermittent reinforcement, the same mechanism that keeps gamblers hooked on slot machines. You call it chemistry. I call it neurological self-harm. Because when you were young, love wasn't steady. It was earned. It was conditional. And so now, as an adult, your nervous system doesn't register safe love as love at all. Consistency feels boring. Stability feels suspicious. And someone who actually meets you, that feels wrong. Think about it. How many times have you been actually loved? Not in the way you romanticize, but in the way that's quiet, steady, undramatic, and found yourself disappointed? Not because they weren't enough, but because you weren't starving. This is the cost. Every time you tolerate breadcrumbs, you train your body to believe it deserves less, and not just in love, in everything. Your career, your friendships, your sense of self. You think you're being patient. I say you're practicing emotional anorexia, convincing yourself you can survive on scraps when you were built for feasts. Pause. Then voice sharpens, almost amused. So here's the bad feminine truth. You don't need to heal your attachment style. You need to outgrow the people who make you think love is supposed to hurt, because the problem was never you. The problem was their inability to hold you. And that's not a wound. That's a weapon you've been handed. Now, what the hell are you going to do with it? Chapter 2, The Polyvagal Betrayal. Your body has been whispering the truth for years. You just refuse to listen. Do you remember the first time they touched you? Not the story you told your friends. Not the romanticized version you fed yourself. The raw, unfiltered truth your nervous system recorded. That split-second freeze in your muscles. That microscopic recoil under your skin. The way your breath caught, not from passion, but from the primal recognition that this person would never be able to hold you. Not really. This is echinos polyvagal betrayal. Your dorsal vagal state, the freeze and shutdown response, didn't activate because you were too sensitive. It activated because your body, in its infinite wisdom, recognized what your mind refused to admit. Their emotional limitations made them dangerous to your aliveness. You think you tolerated their neglect because you loved them. The uncomfortable truth? You tolerated it because neglect was the first language you ever learned, and the body always defaults to fluency. Here's what no one tells you about self-betrayal. Every time you override that gut instinct, every time you force your nervous system into submission with, maybe I'm overreacting, you're not practicing patience. You're rehearsing your own annihilation. They didn't make you doubt yourself. You were already primed for it. The real question is, how much more of yourself are you willing to lose before you admit your body was never the liar? Chapter 3, The Identity Lobotomy. You didn't lose yourself in love. You performed a precision excision, cutting away every part of you that threatened their comfort. Let's examine the specimen. The way you learned to laugh when they crossed lines instead of drawing them. The way I don't need much, became your mantra, not because it was true, but because needing more meant facing how little they could give. The way you mastered the art of folding your hunger into origami swans, pretty, harmless, small enough to fit in their palms. This is identity trauma's cruelest trick. When being fully yourself meant abandonment, you didn't just learn to hide, you learned to perform your own disappearance. The anger that could have protected you filed down into sass. The needs that could have guided you, relabeled as neediness. The boundaries that could have saved you, dismantled brick by brick to prove your love was unconditional. Here's the psychological paradox no one mentions. The more you amputated yourself to keep them, the less there was of you to love. And now you stand in the wreckage, wondering why their love always felt like hunger, never like home. Final chapter, the identity death. Visual, a woman walking into ocean waves at dusk. No music, just crashing waves. You keep searching for proof you were lovable. Here's the truth that will gut you. You always were. They just weren't capable. This isn't about closure. Closure is a fairy tale for people who can afford delusion. This is about annihilation anxiety. The terror of facing that they were never going to love you, not because you weren't enough, but because love was never their native language. You will want to make this about your worth. Resist that lie. The hardest truth isn't that you weren't lovable. It's that they weren't lovers, just emotional tourists who mistook your depth for drowning. Now comes the choice. Keep digging through their rubble for bones you'll never find, or finally, turn toward the life that's been waiting for the real you to come home. Chapter 4. The repetition compulsion loop. You don't keep choosing the wrong people, you keep choosing the familiar people, and to a traumatized nervous system, familiarity feels like fate. Let's autopsy your last 3 failed relationships, not the stories you tell at brunch, the bloody, unvarnished truth. Notice how their emotional unavailability felt comfortable, not alarming. Their hot and cold behavior didn't trigger red flags, it triggered recognition. The moment they started showing real consistency, you either sabotaged it or lost interest. This isn't bad luck. This is repetition compulsion, your psyche's desperate attempt to rewrite history by putting the same villain in different costumes. You keep casting emotionally stunted co-stars in your life because somewhere deep in your marrow, you believe this time you'll get the happy ending. The tragic punchline? You're not trying to fix the past, you're trying to justify it. Every time you tolerate less than you deserve, you're retroactively making meaning of childhood wounds that never should have existed. Here's the psychological grenade no one throws. The reason you can't move on isn't because the love was special, it's because the pain was familiar, and your nervous system will always choose familiar agony over foreign peace. Chapter 5. The narcissism of self-abandonment. You think you're being humble by accepting crumbs. You're actually being arrogant, assuming you can survive on what starves you. Exhibit A, that time you called yourself low maintenance for tolerating disrespect. Exhibit B, the way you framed emotional neglect as giving them space. Exhibit C, your Olympic-level ability to twist their limitations into your shortcomings. This is learned helplessness masquerading as virtue. Your brain has literally rewired itself to anticipate abandonment. Blame yourself preemptively. Reframe suffering as nobility. Here's the ugly truth you've been avoiding. There's a perverse grandiosity in believing you're the one exception, the person who doesn't need safety, consistency, or reciprocity. That you alone can thrive on what would destroy others. You call it unconditional love. I call it spiritualized self-harm. And until you name it, you'll keep bleeding out on altars built to gods who were never divine. Chapter 6. The emotional masochism of hope. Hope isn't optimism, it's emotional BDSM. You get off on the possibility of change because the certainty of their incapacity would destroy you. Let's dissect your last fantasy, that elaborate daydream where they finally see you, choose you, fight for you. Notice how the details are always vague, because specificity would force you to confront reality. This is delusion as survival strategy. Your brain pumps dopamine not when they actually show up, but when you imagine they might. You're not addicted to the person. You're addicted to the liminal space between what they are and what you pretend they could be. Here's the psychological trap. The more potential you see in someone, the less you're forced to acknowledge the devastation in front of you. Potential isn't intuition. It's the anesthesia you take before performing your own emotional surgery. I need you to hear this. Every minute spent hoping they'll change is a minute stolen from building a life where you wouldn't tolerate this version of them. Final chapter, the identity death. The truth will not set you free. It will dismantle you, and that's the point. You keep searching for proof you were lovable. Here's the grenade I've been holding. You always were. They just weren't capable. This is annihilation anxiety, the terror of facing that their limitations had nothing to do with your worth, that you've been begging for love from people whose hands were always empty. The addiction isn't to them, it's to the fantasy that this time you could make someone love you. This time you could earn what should have been given. This time you could rewrite history. Here's your choice. Keep digging through their rubble for bones you'll never find, or finally, turn toward the life that's been waiting for the real you to come home. You have two choices now. You can close this tab, light your bullshit self-love candle, and go back to pretending your suffering is sacred. Orient, you can get dangerous. This is your invitation to goddess vibration, where we don't heal, we hunt. No more therapized platitudes, no more spiritual bypassing, just raw, unfiltered excavation of every lie you've been fed, with the scalpels of clinical psychology and the venom of a woman who's done playing nice. Here's what awaits you inside. Weekly psychological warfare briefings. Attachment theory meets dark feminine wit. Live nervous system rebellions. Somatic dismantling of good girl conditioning. A sisterhood of women who won't coddle you, only mirrors sharp enough to draw blood. This isn't a safe space. Safe spaces built your cage. Press join. Meet me in the shadows. We have work to do.